Today I'm looking at Woodford. Good old Woodford. How much wood would Woodford afford if Woodford could... No, that's not going to work. Let's start again. Today I'm looking at Woodford. Woodford is a station on the central line of the London Underground. What caught my eye about it is that it has a lot of historic features, and you know I'm a sucker for some historic features. Woodford has a long history to feature. It was opened in 1856. In other words, when the first Underground line opened, this station was already 7 years old. The station was built by the Eastern Counties Railway. This was a company that sought to build a railway from London to Great Yarmouth. Unfortunately, they couldn't really afford it because land in London is really expensive. In order to afford a couple of miles of track in London, they had to sacrifice everything beyond Colchester. So that's something over 70 miles of track they had to forget about. Despite their general poverty, they were the largest and wealthiest railway in East Anglia, which gives you some idea of how unprofitable it usually was to build a railway, at least one that served London. In 1862, it amalgamated with those other East Anglian railways to form the Great Eastern Railway, and that's what the GER on the platform benches here stands for. Now, I've talked a lot about the Great Eastern Railway on this channel for the simple reason that they were big fans of commuter rail. Long story short, while their lines out in East Anglia didn't make much money, their commuter railways out of London did. In fact, it was what kept them afloat. Kind of ironic that the London sections that cost so much would turn out to be the best investment they ever made. As the 19th and 20th centuries went on and the railways expanded, the suburbs developed. Woodford became particularly popular with the wealthier sort. Between 1888 and 1892, the Great Eastern Railway rebuilt the station to reflect the town's improved status. This was when the main station building was put up and also when the smaller entrance on the east side was put in. But it wasn't all about passengers. The station also had a fairly substantial goods yard, which is now the car park. In 1903, the Loop line was added. This used to be known as the Fairlop Loop, but now is known as the Hainault Loop. This terminated at Woodford, and there are sidings to accommodate the trains. This line was never as successful as the Great Eastern had hoped it would be, and in fact to this day it's the least used section of the Underground. Basically, the Great Eastern hoped it would encourage suburban development much like Woodford had, but it didn't. Well, not quickly enough, anyway. In 1923, the Great Eastern Railway was taken over by the London and North Eastern Railway. At this time, most of the railways in Britain were grouped together into 4 huge companies. The idea was that the unprofitable railways could be kept afloat by the profitable ones. The London and North Eastern Railway was rather unfortunate, in that nearly all the railways it took over were unprofitable. At Woodford, things were changing. New houses were springing up. Rather than large mansions and country retreats, the housing going up was smaller and more middle class, ideal for commuters, in other words. Unfortunately, the London and North Eastern couldn't take full advantage of this because the line was badly in need of modernisation and they couldn't afford to modernise it. While other suburbs had fast electric trains, Woodford and the other stations on the line were served by steam trains, often rather antiquated. What railway companies had already realised was that a modern electrified railway could generate its own traffic. This was known as the Sparks effect. But it was a catch-22. To make money, the LNER needed to electrify. But to electrify, they needed money. Now, for a video about an underground station, you may have noticed that I've barely talked about the Underground. And that's simply because, for the majority of its life, Woodford was not an underground station. But in 1935, a plan was published that would change all that. The New Works Programme. In 1933, all the underground lines in London became part of London Transport, an organisation that had an unprecedented level of influence over public transport in and around London. The New Works Programme was a plan to make use of this influence. The LNER could get the funding it needed to electrify some of its lines in Essex, but others would be handed over to the Underground. Not that the LNER were particularly bothered about losing a couple of lines that didn't make money. The war put all this on hold, but by 1947 the upgrades had been made. At Woodford, you can see that there are a fair few bits of architecture that are very obviously not Victorian. There used to be a level crossing at the end of the station, but with more frequent trains being anticipated, this was replaced with a subway. In the early 60s, the idea was advanced of running the Victoria line out here. As you may know if you're a regular viewer of this channel, and if you're not, the subscribe button is right there, there were so many different ideas as to where the Victoria line would terminate and which route it would take. But of course it didn't end up here, for better or for worse. These days, Woodford is a reasonably busy station in Zone 4. I find it kind of curious. On the one hand, it has all these lovely period features still in situ. But at the same time, the modernisation London Transport carried out didn't really do it many favours. For one thing, they filled in a lot of the windows on the old Great Eastern Station building and stuck it behind a fence. And the subway really doesn't look very architecturally distinctive. It feels, well, functional. There's a modern entrance, which is, it's okay. Now that's not to say I dislike this station, but I think there are things that could have been done better. I don't want to end on a down note. Let's have another look at those period features. There you go. Good evening. I hope you enjoyed this rebuilt tale from the tube. If you did, please do click the like button, and it may also please you to subscribe and click the bell icon to see more of my videos on the tube and other topics. Are you someone who uses Woodford? Am I being harsh on it? What about the Victoria line? Should that have come out here? Let me know what you think in the comments section. I'd like to thank, as I so often do, my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the attractive ironwork to my unsympathetic rebuild. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.